just want to say, and this is the first comment I'm gonna make on this video. If you're a parent and you are marching your children off into school with a consent form that allows them to have a medical procedure that is more likely, according to the JCVI, to do them harm than good, in order to protect yourself or your parents, shame on you. That's the first thing I'd like to say. If you're in a situation where you're contemplating that and you're going to put your children into a situation where, as far as clinicians are saying, there is more chance of them having an extreme reaction, it's more chance that it's going to do them harm than it's going to save them from something, in order to protect somebody of a different generation, I'm just saying now, shame on you. There's the ultimate act of selfishness is taking place here in terms of this nation, and we've got a problem. This JCVI group, which is the science that we've been following, follow the science, is this thing that's been trotted out over and over and over again. And we're in a situation where the science, this same body that we've been following throughout this whole narrative in terms of policy making, has come out and said, no, we draw a line here, because with this particular age group, there's very little risk, but there is a chance of complications with the medical procedure, i.e. the jab. And the government have now decided to look at the wider implications in terms of psychology and all that kind of stuff, which just seems to me to be, hang on a minute, this ain't quite right. And I just want to look at one of the extreme reactions. Just switch Dr. Hillary off for a minute, and the BBC and these talking heads on the news, some of which have, some of which are just reporters, some of which are just saying that what they've been told to say. We know Eamon Holmes and his missus have lost their permanent job because they said stuff about the COVID narrative that weren't what they should have been saying. We know all that, right? Forget about that for a second. We have got people who are in pay and people who are being paid to say certain things, and there is data out there on the Office of National Statistics. There's information out there on the NHS website and on the VARS, the yellow card reporting system, where people report vaccine reactions. That information is in the public domain, and you can go with your brain, go on the internet and actually have a look at what that tells you, and you can take your preconceived ideas of the fact that you think the government's doing a good job and look at those figures, but it will inform you. Or alternatively, you can just sit in your armchair and watch somebody on the news tell you what to believe from those figures, omit certain things, twist certain ththink, and essentially bring you round to their way of thinking, not with having looked from your point of view at the figures. You just listen to what they're saying about the figures, and I think that's okay. But surely, when it comes to your children's health or your grandchildren's health, wouldn't it be a good idea just to make sure that you've got this right, and perhaps take an hour out of your time to make sure that you've got this right? I'm going to look at one of those reactions that seems to be prevalent the younger you go with regards to this jab process, and that's something called myocarditis. Something that is called myocarditis is appearing increasingly commonly in the yellow card system. Now, what they are saying and what the estimates are in terms of this is that when a young person between the ages of 12 and 15 has a jab, they're saying that between 3 and 17 of them per million that are jabbed are going to wind up with myocarditis. On a second jab, should we give a second jab, that is going to be up to 34 per million that are now going to have a problem with myocarditis. Now, myocarditis, what is myocarditis? It's a problem that it creates heart complications. We're seeing a lot of sportsmen lately that are dropping dead on pitch, having undergone lots and lots of exercise. We're seeing quite a lot. And I say quite a lot. What I mean is, as a proportion, it's not a huge amount, but it's a good deal more than we would normally expect to see. Bearing in mind we don't every week see that. Google it and have a look at it, and we'll see football matches that are taking place where people aren't making it to the end and they're just collapsing with heart issues. This is interesting because there's a correlation there, I do think. But the point I'm trying to make is, with myocarditis, clinicians say that when somebody acquires this or develops it, and it's more common in males than females, then that person's life expectancy is now reduced to 5 years. So this is something that can be quite debilitating. But even in those cases that it's not debilitating, it's not detected and can develop over time, so that 10, 15 years later, that person can be having heart issues that drastically shortens their life. Now, we sort of think to ourselves, okay, now the people who are reporting on this in the news are saying that this jab is harmless or is safe. And this is bearing in mind we're talking about somewhere in the region of, for one jab, 3 to 17 people per million. Therefore, it's safe. So that 3 to 17 is obviously a number that we are happy with. It must be, because that is now being deemed as safe. But those same clinicians are coming out and saying that rolling out the vaccine to 12 to 15-year-olds, right, prevents 2 people per million from hitting ICU. Now, if that's the case, and giving 3 to 17 people per million something that's going to kill them within 5 years potentially means that it's safe, stopping 2 people who may or may not make it but are going to end up on ICU per million, then surely by definition what that's saying is that the disease is safe, which we know it's not. So which is it? And that's quite interesting. And what I want to look at with regards to those figures is a couple of different things. I want to look at the financial logic. If we're playing this just purely from a society point of view, no money is making it to nobody else's back pocket. There's nobody with a vested interest because nobody's got shares in GlaxoSmithKline or anything like that. Let's just take conflict of interest right out of it. As a politician, I am purely and simply looking at the best interests of the nation that I am serving, because that's the way that I work. I've never got my hand in anybody else's pocket. I'm never getting a backhander. I'm never going to retire to a country estate in Essex with the money that a pharmaceutical company have given me or anything like that. I'm just purely looking at the nation's best interests. Let's have a look at the financial logic of this whole situation. 2 people per million are going to be stopped from going to ICU. Okay, look at the cost of that. Now, in order to stop those 2 people from making it to ICU, now bearing in mind, and this is the thing, bearing in mind, this is a jab that is not going to necessarily stop somebody from catching it. It's not necessarily going to stop somebody from being hospitalised by it. It's not necessarily going to stop somebody from dying from it. It's not going to necessarily stop somebody from passing it on. It's not necessarily going to stop somebody from being symptomatic. So there's no guarantees. But what we do say is there is an anticipation that it will stop 2 people from making it to ICU per million. Look at the cost of that. What is the cost of administering these million jabs? And would that money be better off spent being pumped back into the NHS? Possibly. Look at the 17 or 3 to 17 people who are going to catch myocarditis for the next 5 years. Those people aren't going to report it and are going to develop heart problems 10 years, 15 years down the line, because there'll probably be many more that will do that are going to need treating. On top of that, from a financial point of view, this, from a public safety point of view, from a public purse point of view, makes 0 sense. It makes no sense whatsoever, because if you're looking to stop 2 people from catching something and potentially end up in hospital, how do we work out the cost? It just makes 0 sense. We talk about saving the NHS and the fact that there's going to be a stress on NHS. Okay, so we're going to stop 2 people from entering ICU. We have 1,250 hospitals in the UK. And I get 2 of those 1,200 are going to be inconvenienced by losing 1 bed. When we consider again the possibility of the amount of money that we are spending on giving this million people jabs, we could probably buy another 10 beds. So again, question, how many nurses could we set on? How many doctors could we set on? How many more wards could we open up with that amount of money, when you consider that there's 15 million kids of that age that are going to be jabbed? Is this really a wise use of resources? Well, again, if it's about money, no, it's not. It doesn't make sense. You can't explain to me how this possibly makes sense, because it doesn't. Is there a clinical logic? Okay, so I find that we talk about the fact that there's somewhere in the region of about 25 healthy under 20-year-olds have passed away from COVID since this started. Again, that information is probably a surprise to a lot of people. Go and look on the NHS, on the ONS, on the Office of National Statistics website, and dig that data out, and you will find people without comorbidities, very, very, very few. I mean, we're talking, it's double digits, it's low double digits of people have passed away with, not necessarily of, COVID-19 since this started. The clinical logic of this is that we are protecting a bunch of people from something that very, very, very few people, if you know somebody who's under that age group that's passed away, and it's definitely that particular disease. It's not that they've got knocked over by a bus, lost a leg and it's bled out, but they happen to have had a test 2 days ago to go to Wembley. You know, if it's somebody that's, I tell you what, you know, one of about 25 people in the UK, and that is very, very surprising. I'd be very, if you know somebody, incidentally, write in the comments box below, because I'd love to be corrected. But the question is, if we're in a situation where we are expecting 8.5, and after a second dose, 17 times more people than are going to make it to ICU to have a heart disease that is going to last them for the rest of their lives, should we roll this out? The clinical decision to give somebody something that's going to perhaps limit their life expectancy to 5 years against somebody that may end up in ICU but would probably be successfully treated at that age, it makes no clinical decision to do that. And then we have the moral argument in terms of saving the elderly and saving the elderly, which is interesting. I saw a meme which was an elderly man with a papoose on, with a baby in it, and stab vest written on it, which I think is quite extreme. But we wouldn't ever have dreamed during World War I of sending 15-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 6-year-olds to the trenches to fight to save the elderly and the older generations. We would just not have done that. We see in films where people, the best attributes of human nature come out and are displayed, because obviously it's idealism. But we see elderly people and people that are like 40, 50-year-old guys jumping overboard to save children, foregoing their place in the lifeboats. We look at the film Titanic, and it's women and children first, because we protect the most vulnerable in society. Certainly that would be children, because they've got a whole life to live. And here we are now, and our kids have already given up so much. We've already lost years of education, and we've lost so much in order to fight a disease that so very few of them have got any problem with in terms of dealing with it. We have a society that wants to close and shut nursing homes and palliative care zones and not allow people to see their relatives to protect everybody else when it suits. And then we have a situation where we toddle our children off to school with a consent form saying they can have an experimental jab. Now, okay, experimental jab. If you're going along with this, you'll hate that term. But you tell me this, how many people have we got in the world that have had this, have at that stage become pregnant, been able to become pregnant, have gone full term and delivered a baby since this came out? Because I probably guess that's less than 100. That's not, for me, adequate information for me to send my kids to school to know 100% cast iron I'm not causing them some issues with their fertility, especially when we've had all sorts of stuff all over the media, all over Twitter, various papers being written about how this is affecting people's menstrual cycles. So that's all interesting. There's a lot of data being built up now, but again, multi-generational, making sure there are no problem with our kids kind of data that protects us from things like thalidomide happening again. We just haven't got enough data. We just have not got enough data for us to be sending 12 and 15-year-olds, the next generation, to school to go and get a shot in the arm. For me, I posted some videos a year ago, 12 months ago, 13, 14 months ago, where I talked about conflict of interest within the people that were reporting about this, and how it all seemed to be towards driving towards this vaccine. And the more and more people, the more and more age groups that are implicated by this, and now the science is coming out saying actually this isn't such a good idea, yet politicians are ploughing on with it. It just don't sit right. It don't feel right. And I for one will not be sending my kids into school. And again, we'll see people on the news that will be in tears. Eventually, it will all end in tears. And who will people blame? Because the information, it's out there. If you choose to sit in an armchair and watch Dr. Hillary and just form conclusions based on bearing in mind what GMTV tells you, the information is out there for you to be able to go disseminate and look for yourself. Don't be lazy. Do the research. If you like the video, please like. By all means, subscribe and share wildly. Nick as much of it as you want. God bless. These are interesting times. I have to say this because I'm going to say this at the end of every video. you don't know the Lord Jesus, and you are seeing this the same way as I'm seeing this, this is a battle that is good versus evil. And if you're on the wrong side of that battle, or you're on the fence, then I have to say this: every single person on the face of this planet will stand before the God on that day, and the question won't be whether or not you've had a jab, what you did with the information, how you warned people. The question will be what you did with Jesus. God bless, and find him.